the chief doctor dressed as a janitor to inspect the clinic. He was ridiculed, but the nurse's actions were shocking. Brian found himself in this office for the first time. While a well-groomed, authoritative-looking blonde woman seated at the desk across from him spoke on the phone, Brian discreetly examined the spacious room. The decor was stylish, ultra-modern, functional, and it was immediately clear that it was incredibly expensive. Brian felt flattered that the CEO of the private clinic network was meeting with him personally, even though she could easily have delegated this to one of her many deputies. "Sorry, that was a very important call," the tall executive set aside the phone. "Let's continue. So, from this moment on, Brian, you are the chief doctor of our best clinic. There were no objections to your candidacy. Your impeccable reputation is highly valued, and your professional and personal qualities are top-notch. I won't lie, I'm proud that we managed to acquire such a brilliant surgeon. I hope you will live up to our expectations. Of course, most of your time will now be taken up with administrative work." "I'll do my best," Brian nodded with dignity, though he was bursting with unrestrained, almost childish joy. "Yes, do try, please," the blonde smiled slightly. "We've had more than our share of problems with your predecessor. By the way, I wanted to know what made James resign from such a prestigious clinic. Did he really find a better position?" Brian questioned. "I would prefer not to bring this up," the woman said in an icy tone. "But I will answer you. We didn't want to make a fuss, which is why we allowed James to resign voluntarily. And apparently, he started to see himself as a deity, deciding everything and everyone. In short, financial misconduct." "I see. Brian, excuse me, but you don't seem very happy about your appointment. You look quite worried," the CEO observed with some surprise. "Oh, not at all, Miss Grace." Brian laughed. "It's just that I was supposed to go on vacation abroad the day after tomorrow. I've been working without a break for 3 years. And now this. But don't worry about it. I just don't want to deal with canceling tickets and vacation packages." "Well, that's a minor detail," the CEO waved her hand dismissively. "How long were you planning to be away? 2 weeks? Go ahead, take your rest with peace of mind. Your deputy, Harold, is currently acting as chief doctor and is handling the job perfectly. He has been with the clinic for 8 years, is very responsible and knowledgeable. After your vacation, you can start working. We need you fresh and rested. There's a mountain of work ahead." "I'd like to review some documents and get up to speed during my vacation," Brian admitted. "Is that possible?" "Of course. I'll make a couple of calls right now." Already in the car, Brian breathed a sigh of relief. A vacation abroad was no longer on the table. To be precise, he had been considering a trip somewhere in August, but there were no last-minute deals or pre-purchased plane tickets. Brian had always trusted his intuition, and it was telling him not to dive in headfirst without thoroughly checking everything. Something didn't add up in his mind. Brian was ready to start working as soon as tomorrow. He had waited so long for this day, if only the conversation hadn't turned to James. That was someone Brian had no doubts about. He had known James since medical school, and they had even worked together for about 3 years in one of the hospitals. James was one of the top students in their class, a person of crystal clear honesty. And financial shenanigans? No, it couldn't be. If there were financial issues at the clinic, it certainly wasn't due to the new chief doctor who had been in the position for only 6 months. That meant James had been framed. But by whom? Brian was determined to find out, not putting the matter off any longer. At home, he flipped through an old notebook. He hadn't been in touch with James for several years, so his phone number was probably no longer current. He needed to call Sandra. The former class representative remained an invaluable source of information for former classmates even 20 years after graduation. Brian's guess was correct. Within 10 minutes, after thanking Sandra profusely for James's new phone number, he was calling him. After exchanging pleasantries and some usual small talk, James suddenly seemed to remember. Oh, Brian, I almost forgot. Congratulations on your new appointment. You deserve it. I hope everything works out for you in that hellish place. Actually, that's why I'm calling, Brian admitted. I wanted to ask you a few questions. Maybe we could meet somewhere, talk, have a drink? I'd love to, but I'm out of town right now, visiting my mother-in-law. I need to recover from all this mess. Surely, you've been informed that I'm a great schemer? James's voice carried a hint of bitterness. I didn't believe a word of it, Brian said honestly. Do you think I don't know you? I just wanted to ask what happened. Did they set you up? Absolutely. Honestly, I don't even fully understand why the clinic suffered such losses. The system seemed to be running smoothly, everything was working like clockwork, and there were no complaints from clients. And you understand the kind of people who get treated there. My naivety was my downfall, James confessed. It never even occurred to me that something was wrong at the clinic. All the reports were in order. I did a lot of the surgeries myself, so I let the administrative duties slide. Fool. What more can I say? But do you have any idea who might have set you up? Brian pressed on. Yes, anyone. It's the clique over there. James sneered bitterly. Actually, without Harold, no one would say a word. He's the ultimate behind-the-scenes power. Harold has outlasted 3 chief doctors already. And now I'm one of them. James laughed bleakly. After the conversation with his friend, Brian was left with an unpleasant aftertaste. They've broken James, those bastards. They've spat on his soul with their disgraceful accusations. But Brian wasn't so easily deterred. He had no intention of taking responsibility for someone else's sins. But what should he tackle first? Brian remembered the folder of documents. He had administrative experience from his previous job, where he had served as deputy chief doctor. He needed to carefully review all the papers. Perhaps he could find a clue. Brian spent the entire night poring over the reports. It seemed that his knowledge wasn't sufficient. On the surface, all the financial documents appeared to be in order. So what was the cause of the losses? Maybe he should show the papers to someone more knowledgeable in such matters? No, that was a risky move. He couldn't involve third parties. He would have to solve the tangled puzzle himself. Or maybe I should just forget this amateur investigation, a treacherous thought crept in. Calmly go to work and not play Sherlock Holmes? James, of course, is neither a swindler nor a thief. That's not even up for discussion, but he has always been scatterbrained and not particularly observant since his youth. He admitted that he focused more on surgical work rather than paperwork. So, perhaps there was some negligence here and there, and that's how things started to spiral. Money, after all, likes to be counted. In the next moment, Brian felt ashamed of his own thoughts. No, he wasn't an ostrich. He wouldn't bury his head in the sand. And then he clearly recalled his father's saying, for whom words about medical honor were not just empty talk. A doctor without honor and conscience is hopeless. Brian felt as if he could hear his father's quiet, slightly hoarse voice. Our profession harshly punishes the greedy, indifferent, and incompetent. Sooner or later, someone ends up in court, someone loses their gift, and most simply turn to alcohol to numb the remnants of their conscience. Brian smiled. He revered his father's memory. Was there ever anyone in the world who could say anything bad about Brian? Brian grew up in a family of doctors. His father was a God-given surgeon and the chief doctor of a provincial district hospital. His mother, Karen, was a respected internist at a city clinic. Brian had known since childhood that he would become a surgeon like his father. Although, from a young age, he had seen all the difficulties of the profession, his father was almost never at home. He could be called to work in the middle of the night and often rushed to the hospital straight from the festive table, apologizing to guests who had gathered to celebrate his birthday. I've achieved what I have in the profession only thanks to your mother, his father often said, tenderly kissing his beloved wife's hand. Your mother has always understood and accepted me as I am. We are one. Robert was not exaggerating. Brian had never once seen his parents argue. His mother, herself a doctor, supported her husband in all his endeavors. Young Brian secretly dreamed of having a future wife like his mother. Despite their constant busyness, his parents managed to stay active. The whole family would go out of town, find time for skiing and camping trips. On weekends, their spacious apartment was always filled with guests, his father's colleagues, his mother's friends, childhood friends. Many still remember the taste of Sandra's signature dishes. The parents didn't host loud parties with heavy drinking. They were simply regular lunches and dinners or just evening tea gatherings with friends. His father passed away when Brian was barely 23. Strong, full of life, never complaining about his health, Brian's father had burned out from an incurable illness within just a few months. Brian still thanks God that he was able to make his already hopelessly ill father proud with his medical degree. The whole town came to pay their respects at the funeral of the chief doctor of the district hospital. Brian thought at the time, if even a third of the number of people who came to bid farewell to me at the end of my life, then my life won't have been in vain. As dawn began to break outside the window, Brian was still at the table, staring at the pile of papers. This wasn't working. His head was spinning, he was exhausted. He needed to get a good night's sleep. Brian was already dozing off when he suddenly recalled a funny incident from his childhood. Once, the whole family was watching some historical foreign film. A young reforming king was eager to turn his country into an enlightened, developed state. The monarch was very smart and didn't fully trust the reports from deceitful nobles, who intentionally misled him to hide their own sins. To know the truth, the young king would sometimes make secret sorties into the city. He and two of his most trusted servants would dress as commoners and, under the cover of darkness, slip out of the palace gates through an underground passage. I envy that king. Robert had laughed back then. I'd love to do that myself. The hospital is like a small state. You can't keep track of everything, no matter how hard you try. To disguise myself as a nurse and find out the real truth about what's going on inside. Too bad I can't do it. Even the babies in the maternity ward know me by sight. That's actually an idea, Brian thought, sitting up in bed. Yes, it's a bold, risky idea, pure adventure, but it's worth a try. Realizing that he wouldn't be able to sleep anyway, Brian went to the kitchen and brewed himself some coffee. With each sip of the aromatic liquid, he liked the idea more and more. The new management at the clinic wouldn't be there for another 2 weeks, and the medical staff didn't know him by face. Well, maybe someone had seen his portrait in a newspaper once. But sometimes they print such pictures that you can't even recognize yourself. If he pretended to be an ordinary janitor and got a job at the clinic, he would have plenty of time and opportunity to examine the situation from the inside. Brian took another sip of coffee and paced the room and thought. He had only seen such things in movies before. So what? The idea was good, adventurous, risky, but quite feasible. If they recognized him and exposed him, well, he could always turn it into a joke. It was unlikely anyone would dare to accuse the chief doctor of playing idiotic pranks to his face. But it would be better if he wasn't recognized. Sandra, he'd have to call the former class representative again. Brian barely managed to wait for a reasonable hour to make the morning call. Hi Sandra, did I wake you? Do you remember about 1.5 years ago when we were sitting in that cafe and you showed me pictures from your son's birthday? You were dressed as a pirate, remember? Of course. You didn't even recognize me then. Sandra laughed. My friend Vita did a great job with the makeup. She's a top-notch artist. Agreed, Brian said impatiently. Could you give me her phone number? We're planning to play a prank on a friend for his birthday. He's a sharp guy, and we need someone who can transform us beyond recognition. Don't worry about that. No one will recognize you, Sandra assured him. Brian liked Vita. She didn't ask unnecessary questions and answered directly to the point. Brian briefly outlined the situation over the phone. He wanted to prank a friend by working as a janitor right under his nose for the entire day. Sounds funny, Vita said coolly. Do you have a photograph? It's much more effective to work with one. Whose photograph? The future chief doctor asked, puzzled. Well, a photo of the janitor you want to impersonate. You want to replace someone specific so that your friend doesn't have any suspicions, right? You know, Vita, I hadn't even thought about that. Well, it's not a big deal. Think about all the details and call me back, and we'll arrange a meeting. The conversation with the makeup artist left Brian in a panic. An idea suddenly struck him, which should have occurred to him first. What documents was he going to present when starting the job? Whose documents? Where would he get the insurance certificate and other important papers without which he wouldn't even be allowed into a prestigious clinic? Buy fake ones? That was nonsense. He didn't need legal problems. Borrow them from someone? But from whom? Maybe bring copies of the documents instead. Lie that the originals were lost in a fire, for example. Try to persuade them to take him on a trial basis without documents, which would be ready soon. What if they didn't hire him? There would be no second chance. Didn't you want to replace a specific janitor? The makeup artist's words suddenly came to mind. Brian had an epiphany. He needed Kevin. Kevin wouldn't refuse to help if he was told the truth. Kevin Dennis worked as a janitor at the hospital where Brian had previously served as deputy chief doctor. All the medical staff marveled at their resemblance. The men weren't identical twins, but people were always surprised when they saw them together. Both were roughly the same age, just over 40, of similar height, and both had light blonde hair, strong builds, and firm jawlines. However, Kevin wore dark glasses and a small mustache. Brian usually maintained a necessary distance between himself and his subordinates, but he had a special relationship with Kevin. A few years ago, he had literally saved Kevin's youngest daughter from death by performing a complex surgery. Since then, Kevin had considered himself indebted to the brilliant surgeon for life. 3 years ago, Kevin inherited a solid house in the countryside from his grandmother, complete with a large plot of land. Kevin had always dreamed of working the land and having his own garden. When his dream came true, he quit his job without a second thought. He sustained himself well from his small holding. At the city market, there were lines for Kevin's milk, vegetables, and fruits. All his produce sold out in minutes. Now the country house looked like a toy. In the yard, there were 2 cars, one of which was a fairly decent foreign model. In short, the former janitor was doing well. Brian thoroughly enjoyed his time in the countryside, relaxing in the sauna, drinking fresh milk, and picking a basket of plums and grapes, gifts his mother would appreciate. Kevin was not too surprised by his former boss's unusual request. After thinking it over, he spoke. Brian, I don't mind lending you my documents. We look alike, and your makeup artist can make us look like twins. But it seems to me that you need to work on this more subtly. I'll handle the hiring process myself to avoid any issues. After all, the documents are mine, the face is mine. How can they object? Then you can take over. Nobody pays much attention to janitors, sometimes they're hardly noticed. So, no one will scrutinize you either. However, being a janitor, although not complex, is hard work. Will you manage? Don't even doubt it, Brian smirked. During my studies, I worked as a janitor every summer at my father's hospital. I went through tough training. My father never gave me any slack. The next day, Brian and Kevin met at Vita's makeup studio. After a quick glance at the men, the young woman looked disappointed. Yes, this will only take half an hour. You two look very similar. You wear dark glasses, she said to Kevin, so that's good, part of your face is already covered. Brian, we just need to cut your hair, dress you poorly, and stick on some fake mustaches. It's not even interesting. Will the mustache come off? Brian asked anxiously. Are you kidding, client? The girl huffed. Besides, you'll only be wearing it for a day. Nothing will come off. Outside, Brian expressed his doubts to his friend. These mustaches are bothering me. I doubt I'll solve everything in a day. Everything will be fine. The mustaches are actually a good idea, Kevin reassured him. I'll show up with the mustaches, then you'll wear them for the day and take them off afterward. It will look like you decided to shave them off. A person changes significantly without mustaches. So, no one will catch on to the deception. Let's head to the market. Why? Brian asked, surprised. Boss, you're really out of touch with the common people, Kevin said, hiding a smile. You're planning to play the janitor in your designer clothes? Ordinary folks don't shop in boutiques. We'll need to get you a stage costume. You can get caught on even the smallest detail. It's not just the clothes and shoes you need, but also the underwear, socks, towel, shaving kit, and toothpaste. All of it has to match your role. You probably have boxers from some high-end brand like Cardin? Calvin Klein. Well, there you go. Imagine you're in the shower and your underwear is Klein. Don't think that regular janitors don't recognize designer brands. They can spot cheap stuff from quality items. 2 days later, the infiltration operation began. Brian dropped Kevin off at the clinic's gates, and Kevin went in for the interview. Brian parked the car in a secluded spot and waited for his voluntary assistant to return. After 2 hours of waiting, Brian was starting to burn with impatience. When Kevin finally sat down next to him, Brian immediately pounced with questions. Yeah, everything went fine. What else? Did it take long? Well, that jerk Harold kept me in the reception area for about an hour and a half. He had to show off his importance. A slippery type. But you need a keen eye, like mine, to see that. At first glance, your stand-in is a real gem, a well-groomed guy, handsome, speaks intelligently, and is polite. He doesn't push his authority. In short, he knows how to put on a good show. Did he suspect anything? Suspect what? Kevin laughed. Brian, you're going to blow your cover. Do you think Harold is supposed to catch spies and saboteurs? An ordinary guy came in for a job. What's the catch? Notice, he came in broad daylight, not sneaking in under cover of night. Everything will be fine. The only thing is, Harold seemed really surprised that I'm over 40. He said that they mostly have young guys working as janitors and suggested that it might be hard for me to relate to them. And what did you say? I said 40 isn't a death sentence. I have experience, physical strength, and my health is still good. So, what more do you need? Anyway, he accepted me on a trial basis. Your shift starts tomorrow morning. You know Harold's face, and you'll meet the rest as you go. Good luck. Brian had been working as a janitor at the clinic for 4 days, but he hadn't made any progress toward his goal. At first glance, everything in the hospital seemed fine. The clinic operated like a well-oiled machine, and the medical staff were highly skilled. The patients, even the very picky ones, had no significant complaints. The private clinic, due to its excellent reputation, was popular among the powerful and wealthy. So, there was no shortage of patients, including those in VIP rooms. As a newcomer, Brian was hesitant to ask direct questions of his colleagues. Moreover, the other janitors kept their distance from the old-timer. There didn't seem to be any obvious signs of trouble in their behavior. It was just that the younger staff had their own conversations and interests. Listening to conversations in the locker room and dining area, Brian discovered that the younger guys were very reluctant to work the night shift. To build rapport with his colleagues, he often took on others' tasks. He would arrive at the clinic long before the start of his shift and send his replacement home early. The management had no complaints about the new janitor. As an experienced worker, Brian knew his job well: cleaning, washing, serving dishes, assisting nurses interning or changing bedridden patients, preparing patients for surgery. Brian worked diligently, conscientiously, and efficiently. One day, Brian encountered the chief physician Harold in the hallway and said, "Harold, if you ever need someone to cover a shift or work nights, I'd be happy to help." "That's commendable," Harold remarked politely. "We always need extra hands." But will your wife and daughters appreciate such enthusiasm? Well, all the extra money will go to my girls, Brian replied reasonably. So my family is okay with it. Here, Brian wasn't lying, his family really didn't mind. The only problem was, he hadn't had a family for a long time, he had been divorced for 5 years. Brian had married at 30, as they say, at a conscious age. A young, talented surgeon had always attracted women. He enjoyed dating them, courting them beautifully, parting gracefully, but was in no rush to tie the knot. He had the example of his parents' happy marriage before his eyes. He wanted to find that one special girl and live with her in love and harmony until the end of his days. The stamp in the passport and children could wait. Brian met Erica completely by chance. He went to a friend's birthday party, and the friend introduced him to his cousin. Brian fell in love instantly, like a schoolboy. The slender, elegant brunette with blue eyes drew men's attention like a magnet. Brian asked her to dance. During their light conversation, he discovered that his new acquaintance was not only charmingly beautiful but also educated, witty, and tactful, and he lost his head completely. He proposed to Erica 2 weeks into their acquaintance and was overjoyed when she said yes. But she didn't say that magic word right away, they married only after a year. Brian could not get enough of admiring his beautiful wife. His friends and mother also took a liking to the charming, well-mannered, and hospitable Erica. The only thing that puzzled Brian about his wife was her steadfast refusal to work. After graduating from a teacher training university, she had never worked a day in her field. She claimed she wasn't going to spend years repeating the same things to careless and spoiled, insolent students. Brian, who was literally passionate about his work, felt that it wouldn't take long for someone without a beloved job to die of boredom. However, Erica maintained that she had plenty of responsibilities at home. As a housekeeper, even the most cantankerous neighbor couldn't find fault with her. The cozy apartment was perfectly clean. Erica cooked wonderfully. Every evening, Brian came home to a delicious dinner. However, the 25-year-old wife did not want to have children yet. At that time, Brian also did not have an urgent need to become a father. Initially, Brian firmly believed that Erica would understand him and support him in everything, just as his mother had supported his father. But with each passing year, Brian became more convinced that his dream was never going to come true. On one hand, his wife was genuinely proud of his impressive achievements. By that time, he had become a leading surgeon and was earning quite well. On the other hand, Erica was increasingly irritated and upset by his constant absence. They couldn't even go on a proper vacation. At the last minute, Brian always seemed to have more pressing matters related to saving other people's lives. Do you understand that you can't save everyone? You've really found yourself a superhero. If you need to spend all your time saving someone, why don't you save your own wife from boredom and loneliness? And don't suggest I look for a job. I'm not idle. I have more than enough to do around the house. We haven't gone out together in ages. I'll soon forget how to speak to another human being. In those moments, workaholic Brian genuinely felt guilty. Trusting his beloved wife completely, he suggested she go out with friends, visit her mother in another city more often, or go on a vacation with her best friend. At first, his wife was outraged by his words, but one day she decided to take him up on his offer and went to Turkey with 2 friends. Erica began spending more time away from home, practically neglecting all household chores. Sometimes Brian, returning home late from work, would go to bed without waiting for his wife. Therefore, he wasn't too surprised when one day Erica asked for a divorce, claiming that she had fallen in love with another man. The couple had no children and no mutual financial claims, as Brian had left the apartment to his ex-wife. The separation from his wife didn't drastically change Brian's life. Now he could devote himself entirely to his beloved work without feeling that awful sense of guilt. Brian didn't allow himself to despair, but the fact remained, he hadn't yet achieved his intended goal. In 10 days, the new chief physician was set to start his duties. If Brian couldn't figure anything out by then, he would remain an insurmountable idiot in the eyes of the staff, who would obviously recognize him as the janitor Kevin. But soon, luck smiled on the surgeon. That evening, he arrived at the clinic to begin his night shift. As soon as he changed into his uniform, the head nurse sent him to the VIP ward. Vernon Green accidentally knocked over his dinner tray. "You need to clean up everything immediately. He doesn't like to wait, so hurry up." Brian grabbed a mop and a cloth and headed to the third floor. The door to room 12 was slightly ajar. Brian was about to enter when a conversation inside made him pause at the door. He saw Vernon, the deputy mayor, handing a stuffed envelope to the attending physician. "Here's the full amount for the treatment. Count it." "Oh, Mr. Green." The doctor waved his hands dismissively. "No need for counting here." Brian confirmed that the patient had paid in cash for his stay and treatment at the clinic while cleaning up the broken glass on the floor of the room. Vernon suddenly grunted. "Yes, your clinic is an expensive pleasure. The money just flies away. But the treatment is thorough." Brian was shocked by the scene. Why did Vernon give the money directly to the doctor instead of paying at the cashier, as required? Why did he pay in cash when even the most clueless pensioners today know how to use a bank card? What are they trying to hide? In the morning, when the head of the surgical department asked the janitor to clean the floor in his office, Brian decided to ask him a couple of questions while pretending to be a diligent fool. "Mr. Ross, don't patients pay through the cashier in your clinic? It's strange, such a respectable institution, and patients hand money in envelopes to doctors. Or is it a bribe? What nonsense are you talking about?" The head of the department was puzzled. "Bribes? This is a private hospital. Pay the money and get treated. Of course, all payments go through the cashier. Why do you ask such a strange question? I saw Vernon handing an envelope to one of our doctors yesterday. I was surprised." "Oh, that's just private practice. Our VIP patients don't like to trouble themselves with things like going to the accounting office and so on. It's no big deal. The money ends up on the record sooner or later. The clinic doesn't suffer any losses." Brian would have gladly disputed this statement. There are indeed losses. Each unaccounted patient taking up someone else's bed represents significant losses. There is no place to accommodate patients willing to pay properly because all the rooms are occupied. Ghost patients bring no income to the clinic. They are too lazy to go through the simplest procedure of paying for treatment. They have plenty of assistants for such tedious tasks. If wealthy clients pay outside the cashier, then where do the substantial sums of money end up? Brian was convinced he had found the explanation for the financial issues. The remaining question was, who was behind all these machinations? However, he already had a well-founded suspicion about the identity of the main puppeteer. Brian tried to discuss his concerns with colleagues, but all his attempts ended in failure. It was as if he had run into a wall of misunderstanding and distrust. "Kevin, do you really need this?" "What, who, when, where?" The burly, curly-haired Dustin genuinely wondered. "Our job is simple: do your work well and get paid. And by the way, it's a pretty good salary. Why get involved in all these details? Personally, I don't care about the VIP ward. Let the doctors and admins worry about it." Faced with similar responses a few times, Brian realized that junior medical staff likely had a share in the money that was being siphoned off. Therefore, they preferred to keep quiet. Brian had no doubt that there was a strong culture of mutual protection among the staff. Just a couple of hours after speaking with one of the orderlies, he was summoned to Harold's office. As soon as Brian walked in, Harold pounced on him like an enraged Rottweiler. "What do you think you're doing, Kevin? Who authorized you to wander around and ask strange and, I would even say, dangerous questions? Provocative ones." Harold's usual politeness vanished abruptly. "Kevin, who do you think you are? A newspaper spy, for Christ's sake? Conducting a journalistic investigation?" "Oh, what journalist, Mr. Olson?" Brian spread his hands in a friendly manner. "I'm just new here, trying to fit in. Some things are not clear yet, so I'm asking colleagues." And you don't need to understand anything. Your job is to carry the ducks, little orderly. Harold lost all the polish he had acquired over the years in an instant. Snooping around. Do you want to lose your job? And why would you fire me? Brian asked reasonably. I do my job honestly and diligently, and there have been no complaints. There will be complaints, I'll make sure of that. Harold threatened. You think I can't find a reason to get you? You'd be better off quitting yourself. You see, you haven't fit in with our team. They pay good money here, it would be foolish to quit. Can I go now? The nurse asked me to help with a heavy patient. Go on then, Harold smirked meaningfully, dismissing the orderly. From that moment on, Brian entered a difficult period. The doctors and the head nurse, as if in collusion, burdened him with the most difficult and dirty work, which Brian physically couldn't keep up with. By Harold's unspoken orders, every move of the orderly Kevin was strictly monitored. Every shift began with the head nurse meeting him at the entrance with an invisible stopwatch in hand. But the punctual subordinate gave the supervisor no chance to catch him being late. The attitude of his fellow orderlies also changed drastically. The younger staff avoided any conversation with the ubiquitous old man and began openly mocking him, reveling in their complete impunity. The disgraced orderly was shunned like a leper. It got to the point where when Brian appeared in the locker room, everyone present would abruptly get up and leave. Brian felt especially like an outcast in the cafeteria, where, as he approached the table with his tray, his colleagues would not let him take an available seat. This seat is taken. Brian had to eat alone at a table, and the chair he had been moved from drew everyone's attention with its glaring emptiness. It was an immense effort for Brian not to reveal his true identity. Feeling like an outcast in the team and enduring insults was very difficult, even when you are playing someone else's role. These few days were a serious test for the new chief doctor. However, not everyone treated orderly Kevin with hostility and suspicion. One day, during lunch, a nurse from the surgical department approached the table where Brian was sitting alone. "May I join you?" she asked with a smile, placing her tray on the table. Brian had noticed this wonderful, light, and bright smile on his first day at work when he helped Nurse Teresa Jones transport a patient for some medical procedures. As an admirer of female beauty, Brian couldn't help but notice her alluring legs and slender figure, which even the pristine white coat couldn't hide. His experienced male gaze took in everything at once: her wide gray eyes, plump lips, flawless skin, charming dimples on her cheeks, and her age, around 30. One evening, Brian encountered the nurse at the bus stop. Her delicate shoulders were adorned with a luxurious golden brown mane of hair, which Teresa usually hid under a white cap at work. Brian was so taken aback with delight that he was almost breathless. And now, this charming creature was sitting across from Brian, praising the local pastries. "I can't resist these rolls, they're soft, airy. And they're hot. My diet goes out the window, soon I won't be able to fit through the door." "Well, that's an exaggeration." Brian laughed, looking at the petite nurse. "Kevin, you seem a bit down lately. Is everything all right?" Teresa asked with genuine concern. "Absolutely. I'm just not the cheerful type. I've never been the life of the party." Since then, Brian and Nurse Teresa had lunch together every day, and they always had something to talk about. Brian liked her not only for her appearance. Teresa had excellent professional qualities. She worked with enthusiasm and dedication and could connect with even the most troublesome patients. After work, she didn't rush home but stayed at the clinic until late. One day, while Brian was changing the bed linens in the VIP room, Harold came in. "So, this is where you are?" he snapped irritably, as if he had caught the orderly enjoying a coffee break in the lounge. "Get the operating room in order immediately." "I'll finish up here and then take care of it," Brian replied calmly. "You know Vernon. If I leave this, he'll cause a scene. Are you deaf? If I don't see you in the operating room in a minute, you're fired, damn it." The doctor barked and stormed out of the room. Brian was taken aback. "Go ahead, Kevin, he suddenly felt a gentle touch on his elbow. Teresa. How did she end up here? Go, I'll take care of it. Her gray eyes sparkled warmly from under her cap. Hurry up, or they really will fire you. Don't give them that pleasure. At home, while drinking tea, Brian suddenly recalled the nurse's words, don't give them that pleasure. Who are they? Teresa was clearly hiding something. Brian's suspicions were confirmed when, during their next meeting in the cafeteria, the girl suddenly said, I know why they treat you like this here. The other day I even got a reprimand. They asked if I couldn't find more suitable company for my meals. And you? I pretended not to understand the hint. I've only been working here for 6 months, and I don't like everything either. Maybe the new chief doctor will put an end to all this. What don't you like? Can you be more specific? Brian hastened to ask, and the girl immediately shut down. Some things, Teresa replied evasively and changed the subject. The next day, Brian, working the night shift, arrived at work as usual, ahead of time. The doctors and nurses quickly went home, but Teresa for some reason didn't seem to be in a hurry. She sat in the nurse's station for a long time, then left with a large bag in her hands and headed toward the utility block. What is a nurse doing in the kitchen late at night? Is she so hungry that she can't wait until she gets home? Burning with curiosity, Brian followed her. The clinic's kitchen had excellent chefs, and they prepared food to the taste of each VIP client. Still, plates of dinner often remained untouched and were returned to the kitchen. Brian was astonished to see Teresa approach the table laden with cold dishes, pull several small plastic containers from her bag, and start carefully transferring the contents of the plates into them. Brian was puzzled. Why was she doing this? Suddenly, Teresa, as if feeling a foreign gaze, turned around, saw the orderly, and turned pale with fear. Kevin, it's not what you think. She began to explain nervously. I'm not stealing, don't think that. Laura, the head chef, gave me permission. This food will be thrown away anyway, no one wants it. I'd rather take it home to my children, they always enjoy these treats. What children? The man asked, surprised. My twins. Didn't I tell you? I have 2 5-year-old rascals, Michael and Myra. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I didn't do anything wrong, but it feels so awkward, Teresa said, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. It's all right, Brian smiled. Can I ask you something? If you have to feed your children hospital food, even the best quality, does that mean your husband doesn't earn much? No, the nurse shook her head sadly. It means I don't have a husband. Teresa trustingly shared her straightforward story with Brian. Life had been hard for her from an early age. Abandoned and rejected as a child, she had never known parents or family and grew up in an orphanage. Don't misunderstand, Kevin, I'm not complaining. I was very fortunate to end up in this particular orphanage. The teachers, caretakers, and nannies were wonderful, and the director, Tina, was simply a miracle. A golden heart, a huge soul. Especially, she encouraged those who were eager to learn. I always studied well, and after school, I entered medical college and graduated with honors. Unfortunately, I didn't get to work in my field for long. I got married. Thanks to Travis and his parents, I found a family for the first time. The twins were born. They're so amusing. Cute, smart. We were incredibly happy. My husband and I never had a fight in 3 years, can you imagine? Why only 3 years? Brian was surprised. What happened after that? He died, in a car accident, Teresa replied briefly and closed her eyes in pain, as if reliving the tragedy. Maria and Michael were barely 2 years old. If it weren't for the children and my in-laws, I don't know how I would have survived the whole horror. I had to grab any job available, you have to live. Grandma and Grandpa help, of course, but I feel ashamed to take money from elderly parents. Their pension is small, and a lot of money goes for medicine. So, 6 months ago, I was lucky to get a job at a private clinic. The salary is very good. I'll pay off the loan and it will get easier right away. All right, let's talk about something else. Teresa, Brian gently steered the conversation. You mentioned that there are many things you don't like here as well. Can you tell me what specifically? The same things you've noticed, the nurse replied honestly. Do you think you're the only one who notices how the money for treating VIP clients vanishes from the cash register into someone's pocket? If only I knew whose. Kevin, don't be evasive. Nothing happens here without Harold's permission. This cunning, greedy man has outlasted and set up 3 chief doctors already, I've heard. Of course, he shares the illegal profits with the medical staff, but it's just a pittance. He keeps most of the money for himself. We have 2 clinics here, one real and one underground. I've also heard that he's involved in some schemes with rare medicines, but I can't confirm that. But I've personally seen him pocket envelopes. The new chief doctor will be eaten by our Mr. Harold. Or maybe he'll choke instead. Brian was somehow offended by her words. I would be very glad about that. Don't worry, Teresa, give it some time. There will be such changes here soon that you'll be amazed. And your financial situation will improve, I promise. Thank you, Kevin, Teresa laughed, taking his words as a joke. How else could she react to the boastful predictions of an ordinary orderly? Brian suddenly felt the urge to respond with honesty to her openness and reveal the truth to the nurse. But the persistent ringing of his mobile phone prevented him from doing so. The next day and evening, Brian prepared for his appearance at the clinic as the new chief physician. He reviewed all the notes in his notebook, which he had been carrying with him for the past 2 weeks, hundreds of times. He also carefully studied all the documentation again. Everything added up, all the threads led to the Gray Cardinal, Harold Olson. For several years, the deputy had been siphoning huge sums from the hospital, receiving money from VIP patients not listed in the financial statements. This scoundrel had managed to set up his own clinic within the clinic, as Teresa put it, right under the noses of the chief doctors. Although, why alone? The entire medical staff knew about their boss's dealings. They knew and kept silent, receiving a certain bribe for their poor eyesight. Brian couldn't help but envy Harold's composure, courage, and brilliant organizational skills. Finally, Brian would take off those silly dark glasses with simple lenses he had never been able to get used to. Stretching with a crack of his joints, Brian called Kevin. Early in the morning, a luxury car stopped at the clinic's front steps. The driver quickly went around the car and courteously opened the rear door for the influential passenger. A tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive suit stepped out, briskly climbed the steps, and headed straight for the chief physician's office. Harold, who had been comfortably lounging in someone else's chair, was stunned to see the new boss. I don't understand. What is this? Some kind of prank? Harold stared at Brian in confusion. Kevin, what's going on? Are you addressing me? The new chief physician was astonished. What exactly are you talking about? Don't mind me, Harold jumped up, offering his seat to the new chief. Would you like some tea? Unfortunately, we won't have time for tea now, Brian settled comfortably in the chair. Even a bottle of cognac won't be enough. But alcohol during working hours, well, you understand. While I was resting, my people were busy gathering some rather interesting information for me. Please, have a seat, Mr. Olson, this conversation will be a long one. An hour later, Harold wiped his sweaty forehead with a handkerchief and said quietly, You won't prove anything, it's just your conjectures, unsubstantiated. You have no evidence. I have everything, evidence and witnesses. Believe me, there will always be people eager to get back at a greedy, selfish boss who has practically stopped sharing the spoils recently, Brian desperately bluffed, but Harold believed him. You want to blow this up? Not going to happen. I have something too, Harold smirked. Do you think the press will like the story of a mad surgeon disguised as an orderly to expose non-existent villains? Paranoia, so to speak. Do you really think I didn't recognize you? At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Kevin himself peeked in. "Oh, sorry for interrupting. Mr. Olson, I'm resigning." "Where should I go now?" "To the HR department?" "Where else?" Instead of Harold, the new chief physician answered the orderly. "You're an adult, really. Can't you see we're having a serious discussion here?" "My apologies." Kevin quickly closed the door. To say that the deputy was stunned would be an understatement. Completely taken aback by this turn of events, he didn't even notice that, overnight, Kevin had grown a small but thick mustache. "I'll return the money," Harold promised in a weak voice. "Most of it." "Most of it?" Brian sneered bitterly. "A lot of time has been wasted. Unfortunately for us and fortunately for you, we're unlikely to ever know how much money you managed to steal over the years. You're fired. Perhaps you could let me leave voluntarily?" The deputy asked hopelessly. "You're fired." Brian answered calmly and thought, "That's for you, bastard, for James." A few hours later, the entire clinic was in an uproar. The news of Harold's dismissal spread through the hospital at the speed of sound. Shocked staff whispered about the unpredictable behavior of the new chief physician. They had no idea what to expect from this despot in the near future. The fact that Brian closely resembled the orderly Kevin made a much smaller impression on the staff than Brian had anticipated. People were more concerned about their own futures. After lunch, all the medical staff gathered in the conference room at the new administration's order. Brian stood before the employees and, after greeting them, delivered a brief but impressive speech. "You all know about the dismissal of acting chief physician Harold Olson. You all know the sins he was dismissed for. You're not saints yourselves. If I could, I'd fire almost everyone present in this room. But highly skilled workers are worth their weight in gold right now, and you are excellent specialists. If only you had a bit more conscience and honesty, but that's a personal choice for each of you. From this moment on, a new era begins in the clinic. If anyone disagrees with the new policies, I expect your resignation letters. Decide now. I warn you, trying to sabotage me will not work. Well, that's all, I suppose. Go on, get to work, there are patients waiting for you." A week later, to the immense surprise of the staff, the new chief physician appointed Teresa as the head nurse. At the end of the workday, there was a timid knock on his office door. "May I come in, Mr. Baker?" "Please, have a seat." "Thank you." The nurse carefully sat on the edge of a chair. "I'm very grateful for the promotion, but if you don't mind me asking directly, why me? I've only been here for a short time. There are more deserving candidates." "I've already chosen the most deserving one," Brian said firmly. "I am completely satisfied with your professional qualities. What does short time have to do with it? And what's troubling you, exactly? You didn't push anyone aside. Miley left voluntarily to enjoy her well-deserved retirement. Remember how happy she was to have more time for her beloved grandchildren? You should be thankful." "Thank you very much," Teresa hurriedly said, not noticing the sly smile in his eyes. "Actually, a simple thank you won't be enough. May I take advantage of my position and invite you to dinner?" "You may." "And can I think about my answer?" "Of course." Just as she was at the door, the nurse turned around. "I've already thought about it. I'm free on Saturday at 6. Thank you for the invitation, Kevin. I've been having lunch with you every day. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize you?" Teresa laughed reproachfully and left the office, leaving Brian blushing with embarrassment. 6 months passed. The clinic's revenues were growing visibly. The shareholders and board of directors were thrilled with the new chief physician. Brian's personal life also underwent significant changes. He had been seeing Teresa for almost 5 months. It was love. True, sincere, unconditional, and mutual. One evening, as he was seeing Teresa home, Brian took his time before letting her out of the car. Before saying a few cherished words, he was gathering his courage like an excited schoolboy. "You know, I would have proposed to you a long time ago if it weren't for one thing," Brian finally said. "What's that?" Teresa asked, surprised. "I haven't yet received permission from two very important people. I mean Maria and Michael," he explained to his astonished beloved. "Don't you think it's time they meet their future stepfather? Are you so sure that I'll say yes?" The young woman teased him. "To be honest, I am sure," Brian confessed. "For some reason. Or am I wrong?" "You're not wrong." Teresa reached out to him. Over the weekend, Brian and Teresa, along with the twins, visited an amusement park, and the small group had a wonderful time. Maria and Michael really liked their mom's new friend. Brian enjoyed playing with them, goofing around, treating them to various treats at a cozy children's cafe, and shouting louder than the kids on the scary rides. "You're acting like a kid," Teresa whispered tenderly, kissing him on the cheek. "Does it bother you?" Brian scratched his head in confusion. "On the contrary, I'm thrilled. The kids liked you so much." The eyes of his beloved woman sparkled with happiness. As they were heading home in the car, Brian asked, "So, kids, what did you like the most today?" "Everything," the twins answered in unison. After a brief silence, Maria shyly added, "And if you lived with us, it would be even better." "Really? But for that, I'd have to marry your mom," Brian winked cheerfully at Teresa. "Marry her?" the kids yelled in unison. "First, I need to get her consent." "She agrees. We know our mom best." "If she's smiling like that, then she agrees," Maria reassured him. "Mommy, say something?" "I agree," Teresa nodded seriously. The twins, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep right in the car. Brian helped his beloved carry the children inside and put them to bed. As he was saying goodbye in the hallway, the newly minted fiancé gave a sheepish smile. "Teresa, I'm sorry for such a spontaneous proposal. Don't be upset, I'll make it special, a restaurant, a ring, candles, and a sea of flowers." "You're such a fool, Brian." Teresa hugged him. "Who needs all that cliché with candles and rose petals? I couldn't even dream of a proposal like this. Did you see how happy the kids were?" "Of course, I saw. Now you just need to meet my mom." "I'm a bit scared, Brian," Teresa admitted. "What if she doesn't like me?" "Are you out of your mind?" Brian exclaimed. "How could you not be liked? My mom is amazing. She'll immediately see what a treasure her son has found. Plus, we'll bring in the heavy artillery. Maria and Michael can charm anyone." The lovers didn't opt for a grand celebration. They marked their wedding with a cozy dinner at a restaurant surrounded by close friends and family. On such an important day for him, Brian was delighted to have his beloved mother, his cousins, Kevin with his wife and daughters, Sandra with her husband, James with his spouse, and Maria and Michael's grandparents present. For 2 months now, James had been serving as the deputy chief physician at Brian's clinic. Dancing with his adored beautiful wife, Brian felt like the happiest person in the world. Teresa smiled and nodded over his shoulder. "Look." Brian turned around and saw the joyful twins hugging their new grandmother from both sides. Vivian seemed to have rejuvenated by 20 years, such was the pleasure she derived from playing with her grandchildren. "Mr. Baker, I'd like to make an appointment with you," his wife surprised him. "For heaven's sake." "About what?" "Personal matters, of course." "Can't this matter be resolved at home?" "It can," Teresa agreed. "But I'd still prefer a more official setting." On Wednesday, Teresa, as promised, came for an appointment with the chief physician. Brian had to admit that he had forgotten about the conversation at the wedding. "How can I help you, Mrs. Baker?" he said with pleasure, using his own surname. "Brian, I'd like to discuss the candidacy for the new head nurse. Do you think Shelley is suitable for this position?" "But the position is already filled, isn't it?" Brian played along cautiously, not understanding where his wife was going with this. "Or are you planning to leave?" "I hope not immediately." "No," Teresa agreed, "not right now. But in a couple of months, I'll have to leave this position. Why not arrange for a worthy replacement in advance? Are you serious or joking? Brian was completely confused. Has someone hinted that the chief's wife enjoys special privileges and you're planning to leave the clinic forever? Why forever? Just for maternity leave, Teresa enjoyed watching her husband's bewildered expression. Maternity leave? Brian was at a loss. Brian, you really don't know? Teresa sighed. Don't you know what maternity leave is? We're going to have a baby, darling. Are you happy? The joyful news seemed to stun Brian. He looked at his wife with excitement, feeling happy tears well up in his throat, and was at a loss for words. They named their firstborn Robert, after Brian's father.